So recently I had a discussion with another atheist who was of a different opinion than me on the definition of marriage, especially as it pertains to Ron Paul's recent statement that he believes that churches should define what marriages are. Now, we were both atheists, but me as an atheist, I completely disagree with a church deciding the definition of anything in my life. I don't want churches to decide how the law applies to me. But he was okay with it. He thought that Ron Paul was of good intentions. But the more I think about it, the more horrible I think that statement by Ron Paul is, because he didn't say that mosques or synagogues or the Center for Inquiry should be included in this. It's just churches, as if, 2/3 of the planet don't also get married under different circumstances than in a church. So yeah, I don't see marriage as anything more than a contract that joins two estates and decides where property goes. I don't see marriage as something that gives you the right to have sex with anything. I think you already have that right. If you have two or more consenting adults, you can go and have sex. And the stigma about virginity is something that comes from religious culture, and I completely don't think that that has any bearing on what the definition of marriage should be. But I thought about it some more, and I think if we're going to say that churches are the be all end all of what should be defining what marriage is, then what would we learn from, say, looking at their holy text, the Bible, opening it up and seeing what it has to say about marriage? Because it seems like churches don't even follow their own scriptures anymore as far as how they define their marriages, and I think for good reason, because their scriptures are bullshit. And I'll give you a whole bunch of examples about why we should not let churches anywhere near the discussion of how to define marriage. First, we'll just start with how the Bible would apply to a nuclear family, just one man and one woman. Okay? So, a man gets married to a woman, and by definition of marriage, that wife has to be subordinate to the husband. Also, interfaith marriages are forbidden, even though they sometimes happened in the Bible. But marriages are generally arranged. They're not based on romantic love. And if a bride can't prove her virginity, she gets stoned to death. Now, I get all that from Genesis chapter 2 around verse 24. Okay? So, does that sound like good just for the nuclear family marriage? I don't think so. But going on further in the Bible, we'll see that there weren't just nuclear families. You sometimes had man plus wife plus concubines. And those concubines weren't for the woman. They're just for the man, because it's a really male-centric model that you get from the Bible. And you see that Abraham had 2 concubines. Gideon had 1. Nahor had 1. Jacob had 1. Eliphaz had 1. The next Gideon had at least 1. Caleb had 2. Manasseh had 1. Solomon had 300, which is like, ow, like, oh, just makes me want to grab my crotch because I don't know what I would do with 3. That's almost a different woman every night of the week for an entire year. And imagine if all their periods kind of sync together, like when you have women living under the same roof, they all seem to sync their periods together so they all happen on the same day. That would fucking suck. Yeah. I don't see many people in the religious right nowadays very accepting of polygamy in that sense of having concubines, even though it was in the Bible. One main wife and then concubines. A lot of them, when we talk about gay marriage, they say that that's a slippery slope that leads to other things like polygamy. And, yeah, why would polygamy be bad if it's in the Bible? But that was just one man, one wife, and concubines. If you look at polygamy proper, as in like one man and all these women that are on the equal level, Lamech had 2 proper wives. Esau had 3. Jacob had 2. Asher had 2. Gideon had a few. Elkanah had 2. David had... I fucking don't know how many David had. Solomon had 700 proper wives. Now, he had 300 concubines. That's almost one for every day of the year. Then he had 700 proper wives, which would be like... Okay. He's about got like breakfast, lunch, and dinner for every day of the year covered. As far as like if you were calling those meals his sexual appetite. Rehoboam had 3. He had 3. Abijah had 14. There's a whole bunch of other polygamists in the Bible. Is this really a bad thing that the slippery slope then leads next to polygamy if their holy book has all this polygamy in it? Did we come to this point in the Bible, which I haven't found, which says that, okay, polygamy was in the past, and that was bad back then. All of those prophets and holy men and God's chosen men were all bad people. I've never found that. But there's more horrible things that you can find in the Bible about marriage. Starting with the light one of, let's say my brother's gone off to war and he leaves his wife, and then he dies in war. I then have to assume his wife. Let me tell you, my brother has horrible taste in women. I mean, ow. I would not want to be responsible for his wife because... Ugh. Okay. But that's only if she hasn't born a son, I think. Then she would be required to marry me if she hadn't born a son. If she had, then I think she's okay. Which is really confusing. And the law of the Bible would say that if she hadn't born a son, then she must marry me, and she must submit sexually. It can't just be like a marriage where I'm supposed to take care of her and not have sex. She must submit sexually. So there's no getting out of the sexual part if you were to use the Bible to determine this. That would be in Genesis chapter 38. Now, worse than that, victims of rape would have to marry their rapists. That would be in Deuteronomy chapter 22. And a virgin who is raped must marry her rapist, but her rapist has to pay the father 50 shekels of silver for the property loss, because daughters are somehow property. Yeah. So that's pretty bad. But worse than that, yeah, I mean, if you can imagine worse than rape leading to marriage, and a woman having to live with her rapist for the rest of her life, worse than that is that male soldiers would be allowed to then take prisoners of war that were female and then marry them based on the precedent set by the Bible. That would be Numbers chapter 31 or Deuteronomy chapter 21. Yeah. And then, because the Bible allows for slavery in it, we would have arrangement of slaves for marriage by their masters, and the female slave would be forced to submit to the male slave. And I'm not particularly certain, but I think if the masters wanted to perform eugenics, as they did in plantation era South, the South in America, where they'd have one really strong slave and they'd have him stud all the women. That I really can't see that as something that would be wrong as per the Bible, even though I think that part of marriage would be that they would have to take care of all the women that they studied, and which is weird because they're slaves. How can they take care of anything? Because really the master is responsible for everything. So yeah, that's a picture of what marriage would look like if we used the Bible or churches to define marriage. Is anybody okay with that? Let me know, please, because I'm not.